Well, Chris Horner, who is visiting with us today, is a senior fellow with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and he's no stranger to being maligned by environmental zealots. He's very familiar with that. In fact, Greenpeace listed him in its field guide for climate criminals. I consider that an honor. He's a respected attorney and author, and he's represented CEI and scientists and members of Congress on matters of environmental policy in the federal courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. He's the author of 2 great best-selling books, which he says if you brought the book along, he's happy to sign it for you. He's written The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism. I wish I thought up that title. It's spectacular. And then Red Hot Lies, How Global Warming Alarmists Use Threats, Fraud, and Deception to Keep You Misinformed. Ladies and gentlemen, I can think of no better person to help us launch our climate change education project than Chris Horner. He has a long list of accomplishments to his name, but I am going to let him speak to you and clear the deck.
Good morning. Thank you, Benita. Thank you for coming. Very exciting topic. You're probably wondering what you got yourself into at this hour. Cap and trade is applied to CO2. So you came for the food, no doubt. I apologize for this. I will read what's on the screen. You turn that toward me too as well. Power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So you're going to want to see everything. And I guess just to anger Jane Fonda, I'm going to do this tomahawk chop here to get you to advance every slide. So, CO2, carbon dioxide, greatest threat facing mankind. You're exhaling it right now. They want to ration it. True story. It's actually before Congress right now. The Supreme Court has said in a 5-4 opinion, and we know how they feel about 5-4 opinions. Illegitimate, right? This policy was selected, not elected. They want to call carbon dioxide a pollutant. Okay, well, I can't address this without context for the folly of this rationing scheme that we might actually adopt. I don't believe legislatively, but EPA has the authority now according to the court. So, I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, where we are rightly proud of Thomas Jefferson, who wrote about global warming a lot, to be honest with you. He wrote about his friends in Siena province corresponding with him of a warming on the continent at a rate of 1 degree per century by Mr. Fahrenheit's thermometer. That's a quote. He wrote that snows are less frequent and less deep. They do not often lie below the mountains more than 1, 2, or 3 days, and very rarely a week. They're remembered to have been formerly frequent, deep, and of long continuance. The elderly inform me that the earth used to be covered with snow about 3 months in every year, and they walked back and forth to school uphill both ways in it. The rivers, which then seldom failed to freeze over in the course of the winter, scarcely ever do so now. Notes on the state of Virginia, 1781. And yet, just like reading the New York Times today, without the panic or the blame. This is absurdity. Climate changes, always has, always will. Never hasn't. It's a religion to believe that it suddenly did. Now, what we're told about, it warmed, the horrors of the Bush administration, it warmed significantly, and it did, in computer models only. In the real world, where most of us live, it actually cooled steadily. Slide. You'll see here that CO2 went up, as we were told, up, and temperatures went down. So if CO2 drives temperatures, we know which way CO2 drives them. That's 70s panic. CO2 goes up, temperatures go down. We know that A caused B. So it's rising and falling. So these are U.S. temperatures. You'll see it cooled, then it warmed, then it cooled, and this was a panic, by the way, 30-plus years of cooling. So we responded by sending satellites up into space to monitor the atmosphere, because this is not a surface theory. That'll make sense to you in a moment. It's about the atmosphere. It's where we would find the cooling signal and where we have found a cooling signal. But you'll notice that only if you cherry pick 2 decades, and that's what they do, when they're running together, they both go up, A must have caused B. Otherwise, you've got the rest of the century you cannot explain, and recent behavior. CO2 is going up while temperatures are going down. This is the latest excuse for a long-held policy wish list. It is not a reason. Next. So what you see, why? Okay, trick question. Is it warmer at noon or midnight? The IPCC, the UN, doesn't know. They say they have a, quote, low level of understanding of the sun, so they don't really factor it into their computer models, which tell us it's warming right now. Hit the once. So we have to pretend there's no sun, no clouds, no oceans. Is it warmer when it's cloudy or not? Well, cloud formation has a large role in climate. Greenhouse gases have a role, a very, very small role. This is greenhouse gases, gray. Yellow is CO2. Red is man's CO2. And the argument is we need to reduce at the margins because the vast majority of the world says, no, this is such a serious problem that other people need to do something about it. We are to reduce at the margins a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, and if you believe there's a sun and clouds, of a fraction. Now, if you want, during Q&A, I can go over how the ocean behavior, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, and that fiery ball in the sky all track suspiciously well with temperatures. CO2, as you saw, does not. It's an excuse, not a reason. So, you may have heard from this gentleman on the issue, sorry if you can't see that, and he rakishly strutted across the stage and he said, very complicated relationship, but one stands out among all the others. When there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, the temperature gets warmer. That's Mr. Gore, of course. Two lines that do seem to run together. And he lashed out at that straw man, these people don't exist, who say these lines maybe don't run together. But you're wondering why this very tech-savvy man, you know the story. Why was he unable to superimpose these two lines? Because as you saw this movie, you're saying, please, Mr. Gore, show me the truth that you say this data reveals to you. Next slide, please. And the reason he didn't is because he had cause and effect backward, and I suggest he knew it. Why? Because no literature says what he says, and all the literature says the opposite. It warms, then CO2 goes up. How? Well, between 400 and 1,600 years later, that's the debate among scientists, the oceans release enough CO2 to appreciably increase their concentrations, and when it cools, they absorb it. Cause and effect, important and backward, and what the literature says. He told a non-truth. It not only is shown in the UN data, but it's what the only court to examine the merits of this case, the Dimmock opinion in the UK, stop at the Dimmock opinion, is the only court to examine the merits of this argument. All 9 money claims that they asked for evidence on. Now, Mr. Gore's spokeswoman said, well, the court affirmed thousands of other claims in the movie. I know it seemed like forever, but it was actually just a 90-minute movie. There were not thousands of claims in the movie. There were about 4 dozen of any consequence, and the court asked for evidence on 11 of them. 3 involved melting things, so really 9. And the court threw out every single one, every money claim you remember. Hurricane Katrina, Mount Kilimanjaro, the drowning computerized, by the way, polar bear, Ursa maritimus. Any Latin scholars out there? The maritime bear. Can it swim? That's why it was computerized. The rising sea levels, the South Pacific Islanders fleeing and to obtain generous Canadian and New Zealand welfare schemes. It wasn't because of sea level rise, it was because of generous New Zealand and Canadian welfare schemes. And the big one, CO2 drives warming. The court threw it out, saying this is not what the literature says. The merits are not on their side. Okay, so what's cap and trade? The problem is we're told it's warming, so we must ration CO2. This is one of 1,221 official United States government thermometers. This is Tucson, Arizona. That's a parking lot. That's a thermometer. I lived in Arizona. It gets rather hot. Not where you want to put a thermometer. By the way, it wasn't always in a parking lot. It used to be in conformance with the rules. We have rules where to cite official United States government thermometers. 100 feet away from any potentially corrupting influence like a bush. Remember that. Or a sewage treatment plant. In Michigan, they're all next to sewage treatment plants. It keeps it warmer at night, and they're declaring a warming. Actually, they moved this and many others. And a meteorologist went out there, long story as to why, but anyway, he found out that they are suspiciously placed. This used to be in the middle of a field. This is Tahoe City, California. That's a thermometer. That's a trash burn barrel. That tennis court's a no-no. That parking lot's a no-no. This is absurd, but this is part of the data. Now, this is that bush I was talking about. That's not 100 feet. That's a thermometer. That's the chimney of a masonry building it's attached to. Black asphalt pad, air conditioning unit, venting hot air, and it's a Weber brand barbecue grill situated directly beneath the official United States government thermometer in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Heat wave, or are the boys just frying up some burgers? Don't know. But this is what we found. Surfacestations.com. These and many others. These are the rule, not the exception. So when you hear about, like you did last month, warmest March ever, they said the same thing last March. It's this fetish with surface temperatures because ocean temperatures, which should be warming, the models say they're warming, are cooling. Atmospheric temperatures should be warming, models say they're cooling. So we go to this, last refuge of an alarmist. There is no warming unless you rig your temperature station. So that's the reason we're supposed to do this. Now, here's the problem they have. This is titled, What If Democrats Convince Them? Here's the thing. MoveOn.org last month said if Republicans convince voters that clean energy legislation, cap and trade, amounts to a new tax, Obama's plan is toast. That same month, days later, John Dingell helpfully said, nobody in this country realizes that cap and trade is a tax, and it's a great big one. He's a Democrat from Michigan. And then, of course, Senator Benjamin Cardin from Maryland said, in fact, cap and trade rationing is, quote, the most significant revenue-generating proposal of our time. We've finally found the reason, the rationale. This was to raise not $646 billion over 10 years. Do not get involved in the numbers game. That is just the footnote in the budget of the president that was to be spent on two specific programs. It was actually up to $300 billion per year, 3 times almost the largest tax in the history of the Republic, adjusted for inflation, which was the tax to pay off World War II, $107 billion. More than twice, several times larger than the BTU tax, which Mr. Gore says caused the loss of control of Congress in 1994, because they tried this, the president's first budget proposal, new energy tax, stop me when it sounds familiar, large Democratic majorities, we've done this before. So they're not going in through the front door now, they're trying a market mechanism, they say, the gauzy language of there's buying and selling involved, it must be a market mechanism. That's absurd. Slavery and prostitution involve buying and selling. Well, that's a market mechanism. Okay, words have no more meaning. An economic threat here, and a political threat, but not to you. The economic threat is to all of us. It's an overreach. As I said, $300 billion per year. The Democrats I speak to remember BTU. The budget chairman, John Spratt, says, I don't want to get BTU'd. It's a noun and a verb. It's like borked. Many Democrats are saying BTU, and Republicans I briefed have said, you keep using this word BTU, what is it? So they remember BTU. Few Republicans do, but it seems to be getting traction. The key is you don't want, when this plays over, the line of scrimmage to be where it was when you started. You want to move this thing back. You want to salt the earth from where it came. This is not something that should go without a tremendous political cost. It will not pass. We'll worry about EPA in a bit. We've got folks like some of the lawyers in the audience to take care of that. But for now, Congress just needs to be told that stove's hot, and the Senate is telling the House not going to do it. This is BTU. So what's cap and trade? It's a rationing scheme. The government decides how much of something the private sector can have, electricity or gasoline, in this case both. And then they impose a quota, a ration, like World War II gasoline rationing. And that requires ration coupons, which we're now calling allowances. Yes, you're 5 years old again. The ration is set on the basis of your historic emission levels. So if you transgressed and maybe succeeded and grew, well, I'm sorry, you'll be punished because this is based on your historic emission levels. If you shrank or moved to India, lucky you, you've hit the lottery. You sell your ration coupons. That's the market mechanism. What a wonderful idea. It requires the ration coupons. They're now issued to people, but people who don't vote. That is, people under the law, which are corporations. And those individuals, it turns out, just happen to design the scheme to be safe. More on that in a moment. So it's a tax. It's the best kind of tax. It's a hidden tax. This is according to the Congressional Budget Office, including serially when run by a gentleman who now is the president's budget director. So you have to ask, which time you lying? That great question every lawyer has been dying to ask, which time you lying? It's a tremendous tax that is mean to seniors and the poor, or it won't cost anything now. There's a long quote from them. I won't translate. I'll just translate it. Energy and consumer prices rise, output, employment, and real wages fall. It quacks, swims, flies, and does everything else just like a duck. It's a duck. It's a tax, but here's the problem. Unlike a tax, it transfers wealth from individuals to well-placed constituencies. And it is a very expensive tax. It's a very, very mean tax. It's not just regressive, hitting the poor and seniors, anyone on a lower fixed income much harder because it taxes energy and the cost of energy embedded in everything you see. But it's 4 to 5 times as expensive as just taxing that which you want to reduce. If you want to reduce smoking, do you tax cigarettes or do you provide Soviet-style production quotas to cigarette manufacturers? Because that's what this is. It wouldn't work. Center-left think tank, Resources for the Future, said this is 4 to 5 times as expensive as just taxing it because of the social costs and the games you have to build into the scheme in order to hide the tax. Tomahawk shot. Now, Region 9, that's San Francisco to you and me, Region 9 EPA lawyers, who really like a carbon tax, by the way, wrote a paper saying on their own time, unlike a fee or tax, a cap under cap and trade requires Soviet-style pre-planning. And for once coming out of EPA, that was not meant as a compliment. Credits can easily be subject to gaming and manipulation. Oh, that's why individuals like, as you'll see, Enron started this scheme a dozen years ago. Easily subject to gaming and manipulation, creating artificial scarcity that is likely to result in disruptions and unfairness. A preview of such disruptions was provided by the market manipulation that created the California energy crisis early in this decade. These are two EPA Region 9 lawyers saying, please learn from history. There are human consequences of these misguided policies. Rolling blackouts, gas station lines could become a reality. This type of problem occurred in Los Angeles' cap and trade program called Reclaim, which failed spectacularly, close quote. It also spurred the current fraud investigation of a cap and trade scheme that you may or may not have read about. It's nothing it's really fashionable for polite people to discuss in Washington now, but it came out of this scheme. And the individual who administered Reclaim happens to now be running the White House Council on Environmental Quality. None of those good signs. So the numbers game, you may or may not, depending on how close you are to the issue, have gotten caught up in it. There's $646 billion over 10 years, or $300 billion per year. A lot of money either way, but the public's used to a lot of zeros. So we've heard about $200, $500, $800 per household per year, and then we've heard $3,100. This is intended to distract. Okay, all of these are projections of the future, and they're thus very of limited utility. However, the bill before Congress lacks detail. You cannot assess its costs. There's only one assessment that matters, and we'll get to it in a moment. You cannot assess the cost of a bill that intentionally kept the specifics necessary to determine the cost out until the day they spring it on the full House, because it delays opposition from organizing and keeps all what we call rent-seeking companies eager, drooling after the bill, panting in hope that their beak will be wetted. And there's an MIT author who's being quoted who is not being a straight shooter. He said $200, then he said $500, now it's $800. That's just the deadweight loss, the loss of GDP per household. That's a lot. He did not say the $3,100 cost per household is not true. The $3,100 cost per household is admitted by him, plus the deadweight loss. Where does $3,100 cost per household come from? The president said, well, he put in his budget how much money he planned to raise from this. You divide it over the number of households. It's the revenue taken, confiscated, in the name of this scheme. And this gentleman from MIT says, well, that's not really a cost, because it's the government who has the money, and the households therefore gain a $1 to $2 benefit from having their wealth confiscated. Have I mentioned that he's an academic? So avoid the traps. All of these schemes are climatically meaningless. Nothing ever proposed. Kyoto. Nothing ever proposed would detectably impact the climate. It's safe to say this is not about the climate. The issue, once again, is not the issue. There's only one assessment that matters. You may have heard about it. The objective is to cause your electricity rates to, quote, necessarily skyrocket. That's from Mr. Obama, and all other energy costs too. That's his quote. Thought he was before Friendly Company. It was not just the media, but the San Francisco Chronicle. And he said the cost would necessarily skyrocket. He wants to bankrupt coal. Okay, there's half of our electricity. They've already, if you missed it, said you can smash atoms too. You can't reclaim your spent material, and you can't store it, but feel free to smash atoms. You can burn coal. I will bankrupt you. Okay, so there's 70% of our electricity taken out. Barring pixie dust, we're just going to pretend that electricity really does come from the wall, or we're going to be in deep Euro-style trouble. Now, this is axiomatic. It's the point. These costs are not a side effect that we're working on and we hope to fix. Please don't lose sight of this. It's the point. The quote, why I go to the Washington Post. One more and stop. Washington Post wrote, April 9th, 2007, quoting a German CEO of a utility which happened to help draft their scheme, just like certain utilities, rent seekers, drafted in Mr. Waxman's scheme, whereby they get their ration coupons. And the argument is, well, I could have sold them, so I have to build the cost, the opportunity cost of what I could have sold them in the trade part into your rates. See, it's a cost to me. The state gave me the ration coupons, but I could have sold them. So I'm producing electricity instead, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to charge you. $5 billion in 1 year in one country, Germany, windfall profit. Doesn't mean a profit made by an oil company. It was dropped in the lap of a favored constituency. And he said, higher electricity prices are the intent of the whole exercise. If not, why else would you do this? He's right. Like Mr. Obama, he was just being honest. It's not a side effect they're working on. It's the point. If there's another point to cap and trade, I still wait to hear it. What is the point if it's not to price energy out of current levels of use? That's the point. So quickly, in Europe, they've tried this. There's a reality. That's okay. Leakage. Carroll County, Kentucky, they added 175 jobs at a new facility at North American Stainless Steel, which of course is a Spanish company, Acerinox. The CEO at the time, Victoriano Munoz, said, I'm not investing in Europe anymore. Capital-intensive, long-term, energy-intensive investments cannot be made under a cap and trade scheme, where the ration, by the way, continues, that's not a tomahawk shop, continues to go down over time. I'm out of here. I'm going to South Africa, where now, tragically, they're rationing energy formally, so he went to Kentucky. And now their new CEO told a colleague of mine in Madrid the other day, 2 weeks ago, I'm going to Malaysia. I made a big mistake coming to America. I really thought, Kentucky of all places, they wouldn't do this, and they're doing it. Okay, what about this European import don't we like? They're sending manufacturing jobs here. Louisiana, they're considering a plant, or Brazil. Brazil said no. Brazil's a top 15 emitter, a major steel producer. They look very attractive. We're going to do something horribly stupid to ourselves, so maybe they won't go there. ThyssenKrupp, Alabama, they broke ground. Maybe they wasted their money. 32,000 construction jobs, 3,200 permanent manufacturing steel jobs, the kind we want. That's called leakage. It will happen. It has to happen. When the president said jobs that can't be outsourced, windmill jobs, no, windmill jobs have just been outsourced from the UK. Just 10 days ago, Vestas closed a plant because it's cheaper to make windmills in India and China. You are not going to find that you can ride the back of this tiger without ending up inside. Aluminum. Norsk Hydro closed a facility in Hamburg because of this rationing scheme. Idlinger Gaming. There's a facility in Galicia, Spain that issued a press release when I was there one time, so I love this anecdote. I couldn't believe it. They were thanking the government for their ration coupons because they'd gone in, they called it equilibrating our business operations, which means they went into the business of making nothing because it turns out you have to hire fewer people and use fewer ration coupons, which you then sell. It's a win-win. No, it's a drag on the economy. Bastiat, if you've read him, saw these people coming centuries ago. Pharmaceutical company in France said this is our future too. We're going to sell ration coupons as opposed to this painful innovation and employment. Be very, very careful with these schemes. Vows by businesses that selling ration coupons, as the president proposes, this is a bad idea. If you're going to do it, you have to sell the ration coupons, but you'll lose your corporate constituency. Chemical, glass, and cement companies have all said, we are out of here. And the Washington Post even profiled a former Belgian cement manufacturer who is now a Moroccan cement manufacturer, still selling his product in Europe, but employing Moroccans to make it because of this silly scheme. You cannot manage this. Price spikes, windfall profits, no emission reductions. You're going to be amazed by this. No emission reductions. At great cost, it is all pain, no gain. So it was so successful, unfair, the Europeans call it, that they've created something called the high-level group, which is to find a way to start a trade war. And in fact, James Baker, yesterday or today in the Financial Times, wrote a piece saying that, well, President Obama should just threaten a trade war. We should do this to ourselves too and then just threaten a trade war. This is beyond misguided. You have to just, I don't know if there's any golfers here, but it's like if you've never took a lesson and pretty soon you start fixing your swing and you're doing one bad thing on top of another to correct another bad swing, you're going to find yourself trying to manage this one policy on top of another that will not work. Look to Europe. We are told to look to Europe. Great, let's look to Europe. These are Europe's emissions. You'll see they're not dropping as you were told. This is an artificial baseline year because of the economic collapse that followed. That's why they suckered us into a 1990 baseline year. These are their economy-wide emissions. You'll notice they dipped during mild winters, which have ended, very severe winters since then, and economic slowdown, which has accelerated. Economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions dipped. Covered emissions managed to rise even then, all 3 years, year over year. Well, we're supposed to do a rationing scheme because it provides us certainty of emissions. Really? What's the word I'm going to lie? Okay? No. Because it's full of so many offsets. You've heard of the carbon offset scams and safety valves, which is its ugly cousin. This is not about reducing emissions, and emissions will not go down. The laboratory of bureaucracy tried, and they failed. Look at Spain. The president keeps saying Spain. Look at Spain. Okay, 1997, here's where they started their scheme. How'd their emissions work out? Maybe these treaties are bad for the climate. Spain's emissions took off the year they started these schemes. You've got so many games built into them to drag it over the political finish line that you will not reduce emissions. This is the country that the president singles out as our model. And by the way, they are the world leader in these green job mandates. You do not see emission reductions. They have projected by the end of this year 20.5% unemployment. It's presently 17.5. They have had leakage to Kentucky and elsewhere. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, as we say, what is there to recommend this scheme? Absolutely nothing. It is political vanity. Typical headlines real quickly that you could any week. Industry shelving emissions over EU emissions plan, green laws and regulations risk energy crisis, utility halting investments in German power plants due to these emission costs, carbon trading scheme to wipe out European paper industry. We don't have one of those, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, Wall Street Journal last month wrote about this. A cap and trade tax will make foreign companies more competitive while eroding market share for U.S. businesses. How do we know? That's what happened. It's not just theory. That's what happened in Europe. The most harm will accrue to the very U.S. manufacturing and heavy industry jobs that certain people say we want to keep. Won't happen. It will be the greatest outsourcing boon in history, and it may even increase CO2 emissions overall. Why? Because if a company can still find a market for its product, it will go somewhere. Vestas, the windmill manufacturer, it convinced Europe to impose all these silly windmill mandates, and then they moved to India and China to make the windmills. With different environmental controls, by the way. Wealthier is healthier, wealthier is cleaner. Go to the border and you'll see, look to the left, look to the right, where's it cleaner? Go to Haiti and ask them about their Clean Air Act. They say, I need food, fuel, and medicine. By the way, Haiti and Somalia are the two countries that have the per capita emissions quota that we are supposed to meet. So emissions will go up globally too. This will not work. It has to be done globally, and China, India, Mexico, South Korea, Indonesia, Brazil, all top 15 emitters, all just waiting for us to do this to ourselves, all say absolutely not. Such a great problem, you need to do something about it. So I've taken European parliamentarians in to meet, even chairmen in Congress, and the chairman said, I don't want to hear it's not working. One chairman said, I do not want to hear it's not working, it's too early, and besides, we will just avoid Europe's problems. And they've said uniformly, will you let us in on your secret? Because you can't just, this is designed to increase energy costs, which means it's designed to force leakage. If you just sell some of the ration coupons, which is where Congress is going, and they're saying, we must act now, we have to act now, greatest threat, tearing of clothing, and then they say, but don't worry, it won't kick in for 12 years. How's that? Can I get your support? Which time are you lying again? Don't worry, we must act now, but how about if we start it in 2020? This is a political gesture. No scenario would detectably impact the climate, by the way. But these are all some more signs to take into account political gesture. You're going to have the problems. They say, well, market mechanisms. See, this allows the market to allocate the ration coupons. No, it doesn't. Read the bill. They politically allocate them, and then you can sell your ration coupons to those who didn't have a Washington lobbyist. This is a political allocation. The only market mechanism possible here is actually the president's plan. Sell all the ration coupons. Never happened. You still have the gaming, the distortion, the offsets, inefficiencies, wealth transfers. No reductions, just cost, and you cannot avoid the one thing that it is designed to do. Significantly cause your electricity prices to, quote, necessarily skyrocket, quoting the president. That means leakage will occur. If it doesn't, the thing's not working. It is axiomatic. Okay, it's another financial scandal in the making. This is my final point. Make it a political scandal instead. Remember who started this and remember who's pushing it. Okay, who would have guessed that a bill written by big business special interests is benefiting big business special interests? You have to go back, Google the phrase, our new playground. European traders used it ritually. They called carbon CO2 trading our new playground. Well, last month, this was last month actually, some Wall Street derivative types climbed out from under the rubble to see what they could do now and said, well, these are quotes from two different stories. I smell bucks to be made. I can see Nirvana coming, a huge playground. These are the folks pushing it. And by the way, those both on Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, Al Gore's group's bank, first one down, led the collapse. Merrill followed. These are the two who were most heavily invested in this. The utilities pushing this share an unhappy history of prosecution for market manipulation, particularly rising out of California. I could name names I have publicly. It's no secret, except in Washington. These are individuals who, and it brings me to my next slide, who have a history of trying to make money off of nothing. They dedicating great human capital to discovering new schemes to make money off of nothing. That's how I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer who represents scientists. Why am I in this issue? Because 12 years ago, I was innocently practicing law and received a phone call from Enron to be Director of Federal Government Relations. I accepted the offer with the encouragement of my firm. Great company, everybody loves them, even the Republicans, very close with the Clinton administration. I was told that my number one priority was to get a global warming treaty and get the U.S. in it, and here's what we had to include. And by the way, India and China can stay out because we're making a fortune building coal-fired power plants there. But we have the world's second largest natural gas pipeline. We just bought on the cheap the world's largest windmill company. We bought the world's second largest solar panel company. That's BP now, by the way. The windmills are GE. You may have heard from them on this issue. And then we set about to add value to our investments. After Kyoto, from Kyoto, Ken Lay's Kyoto lobbyist, John Palmisano, said, this is exactly what we've been lobbying for. This agreement will be good for Enron stock. 2 exclamation marks, could have used at least 3, obviously. This is what, if implemented, Kyoto will do more to promote Enron's business than almost any other initiative outside of restructuring. Enron now has excellent credentials with many green interests, including Greenpeace, WWF, NRDC, and so on. This position should be increasingly cultivated and capitalized in parentheticals and misspelled, but you get the point, monetized. Pay groups to go about scaring people into accepting our agenda, because we just bought a bunch of investments on the relative cheap and we'll be rich, rich, rich if we get a rationing scheme in place. This wasn't about producing anything. They set up a trading floor with Goldman to play bookies, wetting their beak at both ends, selling ration coupons. They were looking for ways to make money off of nothing. It was a canary. It was a red flag. I sent some Houston, we have a problem emails. Life became very unpleasant. I was out within a month. Others within the company who are now out, Rob Bradley was an economist for Ken Lay, and he warned him about this continuously. This was the mindset that brought down Enron. And you see this, by the way, as a common thread among the companies pushing this. Finally, the non-financially vested left admit this is a replay of the subprime mortgage mess. In Europe, the papers are actually calling these green job schemes subprime jobs. They had a bubble. They created 50,000 green jobs in Spain. They just lost 40,000 of them because they required more and more pumping into the bubble just to maintain them and constant expansion just to maintain them. They collapsed. They couldn't afford it. As the MEP Dan Hannan recently said to Gordon Brown, "You have run out of our money." That's what happened. So this is according to The Guardian. This is a very hard-read paper. The Guardian, market must be unashamedly rigged like medieval partners handing out unlimited indulgences. Europe's whiz-bang carbon market is turning subprime. This would create a system, this is Friends of the Earth. Questionable source, I understand, but this is what they say. Cap and trade would create a system that poses almost identical challenges as those in the mortgage lending industry. This is just 2 months ago, so they are referring to the current meltdown. Robert Shapiro of the left-leaning think tank NDN, cap and trade would create trillions of dollars in new asset-based financial instruments. Wall Street sees emissions permit trading as a lucrative new market that could earn them billions in new fees, commissions, and while it lasts, speculative gains. Nowhere in fees, commissions, and speculative gains do you hear actual production. You don't hear innovation. You hear an inefficiency being put on the economy because artificial scarcity has been imposed by the state, and now you have to buy allowances. I believe I'm done. Quick recap. We've got green jobs. I can show you slides about the fun stuff, the science and all that. But the rest of the world adamantly rejects doing this. They adamantly reject it. You can't spin China, India, Mexico, everybody saying no. They're trying, but you cannot spin it. You will leak if you do this. That is, jobs will go where they can go, people who choose not to do this. Europe acted, they leaked, including here. Now they're going to Malaysia and Brazil. That is very unwise on our part. Emissions went up anyway, both in the EU and globally. This is not about reducing emissions, and it will not reduce emissions. They suffered economically. Same thing, wash, rinse, repeat. If we tried this, exact same thing would happen. The problem is our scheme is not like Europe's. We have a system that allows green pressure groups to go to the courts and say, but the law says, you remember the Endangered Species Act, and the court said if Congress meant something else, they would have said something else. Dam's got to go. Be very, very careful of giving authority to an agency on the promise that we won't use it. We'll suffer completely for naught, all pain, no gain. It's either a global rationing scheme, and I don't know who's going to coordinate that, but I know who wants to, or this is a complete fool's errand, and you need to do what humanity's always done. Climate change always has, always will. Society's always adapted. That's been the response. The wealthy societies have adapted best. Energy poverty has nothing to do with the proper societal response. The last global climate change was the little ice age, and how did the French respond? That's what we're supposed to ask all the time. Well, they set their neighbors on fire. 3 times as many witches were burned because the crops failed because it got cloudy and it was cold. You've heard of the Dark Ages. So they burned Goody Smith next door. Never liked her. She doesn't have an SUV. Throw her on the pile. That's an unsuccessful societal response to climate change, which always is underway. It is a myth that suddenly climate is no longer stable. Look at cultural artifacts. Read diaries, agricultural records, immigration patterns, our own history. It was miserably cold when our country was founded. So going forward, this is just for those engaged politically on the issue in the room. Politically, this is nothing to fear, quite the contrary. Some people have climbed way out on a limb. You do not need to rescue them. You do not need to make their lives easier. You need to make them pay a political price for having tried this. You seize the issue and you glue it, Enron, and all of this to anybody pushing it. You seize the offensive as well. This is the cost, the unfairness. The fairness argument killed Kyoto for us. By the way, we did sign Kyoto, just in case you're wondering how accurate the news tells you about these issues. We signed Kyoto. We never unsigned it. We could ratify it tomorrow. Not going to do it. This is not about emission reductions. This is about trying to find a way to impose a particular agenda. This is BTU again, but only if you make it. If you just play defense and wait for them to hit you and yell BTU, you will be not nearly as successful, and you won't push them back. They say, well, you propose doing nothing. That's intellectually dishonest. You propose doing nothing, but at great expense. Nothing ever proposed according to anyone or any set of assumptions or scenario would detectably impact the climate. Google the phrase, first of 30 steps. Kyoto was the first of 30 treaties, admitted by Tom Wigley, the guy who developed the models for all of this. All pain, no gain. And the rest of the world is fairly clear. It's best managed by taking the offensive. Do not just sit back and wait for them to hit you. This is their mistake. It is their cost. Why do you want to increase our energy costs? And what will the temperature be if we accept your tax increase? There's not a good answer for that question. The question just needs to be asked early and often. There's a political price to be paid. It's real. It's not yours. I believe that's all. Yes, thank you. Questions? Keith.
Chris, what about the EPA regulation, and what's the likely trajectory of that?
Okay, EPA regulation is, it's a fairly open secret that is a way to bully members of Congress into accepting this. The argument is being made, well, we have to because the agency works for somebody, and his name's President Obama, and they can do what they want. The Supreme Court did not say you have to do this. The Supreme Court said, do it or give me a reason in the statute why you're not. The Greens will keep suing, I understand that. But the agency does not have to do this. It is a threat. There is a one-line correction by Marsha Blackburn, a Republican representative from Tennessee, saying the Clean Air Act as written shall not be used for this purpose. Before they say EPA is making me do it, I'd say, did you cash your check this month? Do you really think you can't perform your job anymore? If so, please abdicate, because here's a solution. It's the greatest regulatory intervention in our history, the biggest tax increase in our history, and you don't want to proceed deliberately. You want to rush, saying, well, EPA, those mean regulators are making me do it. There's a way to manage this, but they're going to proceed as a threat. Let's just game this out and say they actually go forward. It's premised on computer models entirely. Observations disprove the theory. I don't mean call it into question. Observations disprove the models. The models say it's been warming for 15 years. There's been no warming in 15 years. So the models are demonstrably wrong. They're tuned to be very, very sensitive to CO2 increases. They don't factor in the sun, they don't factor in clouds, they don't factor in the oceans. They're all, quote, low level of understanding. They don't even call water vapor a greenhouse gas. 95% by content and impact. So I think that we have a very good chance in court under the junk science opinion, Delbert, that says you can't introduce the product of general circulation models. And we're going to have to say, is this arbitrary and capricious on the basis of observations? And I argue yes. It's in the name of something that's not happening, that you insist is happening, that nobody says this would do anything about. It gets a little more arcane than that because you're going to get into the Clean Air Act specifics. But ultimately, if they're precluded from relying upon the models, and I'm quite confident they will be, then they've got nothing to rest their head on. So the point is the EPA rulemaking is, we're being told we have to because EPA is making us. On Earth Day, I was on a panel that Barbara Boxer kicked off, and she was threatened everybody, and it's now a common phrase. Well, you'd rather have me write this than EPA, and well, no. Actually, I wouldn't. I don't know that you could do a worse job, except EPA is implementing an act you wrote. I've read the Waxman-Markey bill, and the details that are there make it quite obvious. The new schemes they put in for citizen suits and other problems ensure that this is not worth the candle. You cannot negotiate this to being acceptable. But all of the things that they refused to put in the bill, the various preemptions that are necessary, you still can sue to use the Endangered Species Act as a global warming bill. You still can. We're still going to have the Law of the Sea Treaty problem internationally. We'll still have Kyoto 2, which is being put off until next summer because it's hot. True story. It won't come in December, but in June they're planning it now. And you're still going to have NEPA as a global warming vehicle. So the bill doesn't solve any problems. And I don't see the argument that I'd rather try my chances in court with the EPA than roll over for Congress, who are the ones who could get us out of this, don't seem to want to, and got us into it. Yes, sir.
I read recently that Thomas Friedman was paid, I don't know, $75,000 to go speak to his various groups about his different books, and I'm sure you got a similar fee for today's presentation. But I'm just curious as to the reconciliation of some of his theories, and he's got pretty widespread following a lot of his books with some of your findings and research.
But he continues to push essentially a faith called Malthusianism, that there's just enough of him, way too many of you and me. If we get wealthy, we'll have babies, and that'd be the worst thing that could happen. Therefore, we need to populate. People are pollution. And it's a very European attitude. We've got ours. Isn't it time to stop? All those wretched third worlders who keep having babies, they misunderstand the problem. He continues to miss that wealthier is healthier and cleaner. That only when society attains a certain level of wealth do they place an economic value on various environmental media. Clean air, clean water. You can parts per thousand, parts per million, parts per trillion. We're so wealthy now. Now we're going to pretend we can put a thermostat on the wall of the world. The ultimate arrogance. We must be really, really wealthy. That's I think, the misguided nature of the Friedmans of the world. It's It's a very elite opinion, and yeah, he gets paid a lot of money to do it. I forget who it was that Enron had on retainer. It was either Friedman or the Christoph. No, it wasn't Christoph. We had a lot of folks, including alarmist scientists, helping push this. This is another in a series of very bad ideas that don't withstand scrutiny. He pushes it on emotion and an argument. But again, it's betrayed by observations. If you want to, well, there's two ways to cool the planet. One is reopen the Siberian temperature stations. Because in fact, in 1990, there were people, I'll call them Soviets, who had other things to worry about. Collapsing empire, loose nukes, Chechen rebels. They stopped. We closed more than half of the world's surface temperature stations, and we suddenly had the world's hottest decade. Or did we? Reopen the Canadian and Russian stations and see what happens. I bet you cool the planet. It's a lot cheaper than rationing energy. The other way is to try to make the world wealthier. Because the Greens missed this too. If you really think people are the problem, look who has babies and look who doesn't. Wealthy countries don't. And there's this, the religion is blinding them to facts, I'm afraid. And there are things, the role of wealth and the reality of population, if that really is their problem, well, they have a hard time reconciling wealth with a lot of things, other people's wealth. Yes, sir.
Named Howard Marshall. I agree with everything you said. You've said some interesting things, but some of the best arguments against this cap and trade are actually in NOAA publications. There are NOAA publications you didn't cite, that I'm sure you're aware of, that are great published peer-reviewed papers that never appear in the media. For example, you're like these islands in the South Pacific that are going underwater. But NOAA publications show that 150 years of tide gauge data, you can draw a straight line through it. The best tide gauge in the United States is Key West, Florida. Tide has come up, sea level will drop approximately 7/10 of a foot in the last 100 years. When the American Indians came to Florida 10,000 years ago, sea level was 100 feet below where it is now. Now, how many clams did they have to bake to raise the sea level 100 feet? Now, these are all published papers.
They can't win on the science, which is why I'm saying take your chances with EPA, not with Congress.
These arguments are never used.
I wouldn't say that. They're out there. That's depressing because I spend my time on small airplanes going to lecture hippies on campuses telling them, look, here's the data. Sea level rise peaked in 2005. So that president is persuasive because the American people voted 53-47 to slow the rise of the sea levels, as you know. And it peaked in 2005, coincident with cooling. Sea levels go up about 8 inches per century in interglacials. But when it cools, they slow down, and sea level rise peaked in 2005. This is it's in the literature. The IPCC is not peer-reviewed. It is not considered the literature. EPA outsourced it, and they appealed to authority. All of what you're saying will be our evidence. It isn't precluded from being introduced. I suggest the IPCC is.
Sea level's
It's
been
there.
coming up 18,000 years. Earth's been warming 18,000 years. This is all in peer-reviewed publications.
They can't win on the science. I'm confident. And we can't win in Congress except we can stop it, but you can't negotiate something good out of this. You cannot say, I'm sure we can make this better than whatever EPA would do. Read the bill before making that determination.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one more thing. This debate is going on in Washington and it's going on in Congress, but don't think that it's nebulous in Georgia, because I know and I have heard the environmental groups in the state say that we are behind the times because Georgia does not have a climate action plan. And their next push is a climate action plan for Georgia. And I'll say one more thing. We're a market-oriented think tank. Businesses don't pay taxes. People pay taxes. Every tax that is going to come down from Washington or come down from anything that passes through the state capitol is going to come right on the heads of families and on the backs of families and taxpayers in this state and around this nation. So I encourage you to join us. I encourage you to support us in our climate change education project. If you're not a member yet, join us, please. We need support and we need like-minded, common sense people who can who can get behind us and make sure that sound science prevails in this debate. Thank you all for coming, and I hope we see you at our next event.